And now our main talk inshallah will be delivered by Ustadh Tariq Pandor. As you all know, Tariq Pandor studied Arabic in the European Institute for Human Sciences, and he's also a student of Sheikh Akram Nadwi and Sheikh Abdullah Judeya, and he received his Arabic certificate last year, 2010, from Al-Salam Institute. Tariq.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن اتبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما يا أرحم الراحمين. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like to welcome you all, inshallah, to this new series of Tafseer. 4 circles, inshallah, explaining the meaning of the last 10 surahs of the Quran, and possibly a bit more as well, because I don't think we need all 4 for the last 10 surahs. But the focus is on Surah Al-Fil to Surah Al-Nas. It marks a return of the Friday circle to the theme of Tafseer. Obviously, we've spent maybe a couple months even, away from the Quran. So inshallah, it's nice to come back and drink from that spring that the companions drank from. Companions like Mus'ab ibn Umair radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Before I jump into tafsir of these ayahs, these surahs, I want to just mention, however, a few points about tafsir in general and about reflecting upon the Quran. And maybe what I'll do is every week maybe just add 1 or 2 on top of this, just so that we get into the habit of thinking about the Quran in a different way, inshallah. Most of that which I'm going to say today, including some of these points, and more particularly from the tafsir, I just want to mention the reference for it. Most of it comes from one of my teachers, as Ahmed Karim mentioned, Sheikh Akram Nadwi, who himself studied with a teacher of his by the name of Maulana Shahbaz Islahi, who studied with another teacher of his, Maulana Akhtar Ahsan Islahi, who was a student of Maulana Hamiduddin Farahi. Now, Hamiduddin Farahi is a key figure in the science of tafsir and even Arabic as well in the last century of Islam. In the last century, basically, he passed away in 1930, and he was from the Indian subcontinent. And he was an expert in Arabic, in Urdu, Persian, English, but his specialism was in the field of tafsir, and particularly Arabic and linguistic tafsir. Not just linguistic, actually, tafsir in general. And he was a very keen proponent of the theory of coherence within the Quran, nizam, tanasub wa nizam. And really, this is something that he added quite a lot to in the field of tafsir, in the field of usul al-tafsir. And if you read any of his books, you'll come to realize that he thinks beyond even some of what the earlier mufassirun thought in applying the theory of coherence within the Quran. And you'll see that come to the fore hopefully today when I talk about the surahs that we're covering today. Right, back to the few points I just want to mention about tafsir. The first thing that we need to remember when we approach the Quran is the Quran is a favor from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahman, 'allama al-Quran. And then, khalaqa al-insan. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts the Quran, the teaching of the Quran, before even creation. Okay? Because Ar-Rahman is the most merciful, whose mercy never stops. Okay? And the most important thing that He's given us as human beings is this Quran. Even before the fact that we are even, humans, even before the very body we were given, is the fact that we have the guidance of the Quran. The Quran is like a guidebook, a manual. For what? For this very life that we're living. So before we can even talk about life, we need to know the guidebook, the manual, to assemble this life that we're going to live in this dunya. And that's why the Quran precedes the creation in terms of when you think of the ni'mah, about the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. So we need the Quran. That's the point. We need the Quran. It's a mercy to us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which we need. We need it just as we need air to breathe. We need it just as we need food to live. We need the Quran. Even more importantly than those things, we need the Quran. Because those things fulfill our material existence, which is what? 60 odd years? But our eternal existence, which goes beyond this world, those things don't fulfill that. The things that will fulfill that is the Quran. So we need the Quran. So when we approach the Quran, we need to approach it as someone trying to quench his thirst. Someone at the extremities of thirst, needing water. That's how much we need the Quran. The Quran is a book of guidance. It's the central guidance for our life. So give the Quran the position it deserves in our life. Every other bit of guidance that you'll find in this world, any poets, any philosophers, anyone who comes up with any theories about how to live in this world, anything, all of that are branches from the central guidance of the Quran. They're okay, we can learn from them. As the Prophet ﷺ says, or is narrated that he said in a hadith, that wisdom is the lost property of the believers. So we can take from anywhere. But the point is, they must all be secondary to this eternal primary source, which is the Quran. So read it like that. Read it as if we need it, and it's going to give us the first, it's going to give us the most important things that we need in this life. Okay, so approach it like that. The second thing to think about when approaching the Quran is approach it with a free mind, a clear mind, an uncluttered mind. Don't approach the Quran with your own preconceived ideas about what life should be and should not be. Don't approach the Quran with your own ideas about human existence and philosophy, history. Approach the Quran with a clear, uncluttered mind. The Prophet ﷺ was ummi. He was unlettered, as in couldn't read and write. Now, one of the wisdoms behind that was that he had, therefore, this clear, clean, uncluttered mind. And the Arabs in general anyway. Ummi is when you are the same as when you came out of the womb of your mother. Ummi is when you are the same as when you come out of the womb of your mother. I.e., completely clean, a clean slate. If you approach the Quran like an ummi, then we'll gain from the Quran everything that we ought to gain from it. So approach the Quran like an ummi, like you just came out of the womb of your mother. No preconceived ideas. Don't interpret the Quran in the light of your ideas, but let your ideas be fashioned by the Quran. Okay? Try it. And it'll make a difference, inshallah, when you approach the Quran. And this is important for us, especially in the West, where we live in society with lots of ideas, a lot of which don't have a basis in the Quran. They didn't come out from the Quran, they came from elsewhere. So we need to be careful. We're not saying we can't benefit from them, of course, but we just need to be careful that we approach the Quran with a different mindset, with a clean mindset. The other point I want to mention, and this will just be the last point on general tafsir, is about reflecting upon the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders us in the Quran to do tadabbur of the Quran. You might have heard this word before, tadabbur. To reflect upon the Quran. But what does tadabbur actually mean? It comes from the root word dubur, da-ba-ra, which means the back of something or the end of something. Okay? The end of something. It's very important in understanding tadabbur. So tadabbur is to think about something thoroughly to reach its logical conclusion. To think about something all the way to where it will end. That's tadabbur. Not to look at one aspect of something and be impressed, but to follow it through and see where it goes until you get to the end of it. Not to be superficial. not to be superficial. And that's tadabbur. The opposite of tadabbur in English, to be superficiality. Being superficial, thinking about the surface only, and being impressed, or forming opinions based on just a surface understanding of things. You can think of this in so many different examples about tadabbur in life generally. I mean, think about the food you eat. You know, to be superficial would be to just eat anything on the face of the earth because you're hungry or it tastes nice. Tadabbur would be to think about, well, actually, is this beneficial for me? Is this healthy or not healthy? How much of this do I actually need? Do I need to fill my entire stomach, or do I need to fill only a third that the Prophet ﷺ recommended? How many times a day should I be eating? Should I be eating every single hour? To think about, and then the other thing is to think about this food. Where did it come from? Where did it come from? Did I make it? Did I generate it? Did I buy it from a shop? Where did the shop get it from? Where did it come from ultimately? It came ultimately from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore I ought to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. And I ought to use it sparingly, because it's a resource of Allah's. So to think beyond the basics of what your immediate need, but to think and follow all the links through until you reach ultimately on everything, but you reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the ultimate example of tadabbur in the Quran is Ibrahim alayhi salam. Ibrahim alayhi salam. If you look at the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, you'll see he's a person who's not impressed or satisfied with superficialities, but rather he wants to go behind him. Which is why when he looks at the moon and the sun and the stars, and then he says, "La uhibbul afilin." I don't like things which set. What does that mean? I don't like things which set. Because anything which sets means there's a period where it's not dominant. It has its day and then it goes. It has its time and then it goes. I want something more than that. I want to know who created these things. The thing that never sets. And therefore he goes beyond and beyond and beyond, and he reaches Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And his whole life is an example of that. It's not, of course, from Ibrahim alayhi salam, but Ibrahim salam is central to what's coming in the surah, so that's why we need to understand Ibrahim alayhi salam a little bit. So he's not impressed with what everybody else is doing in the society around him, but he thinks things through until he reaches the logical or ultimate conclusion, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's tadabbur, and that's what we want to do with the Quran. Okay? So inshallah, we want to look at the last 10 surahs of the Quran. Can I just ask, how many people know the last 10 surahs? Just raise your hands if you know them, or most of them anyway. From Surah Al-Fil to Surah Al-Nas. You don't know? Yes? No? Okay, some of you will be shy to pick them up. They're the most that we read in the Surah in Salah, isn't it? Because they're the shortest probably. But they're also the first we learn as a child, so they're the ones that most reinforce in our mind as we grow older. So we ought to know what they mean. We ought to know what they mean. Because it's a shame if we're praying and saying these surahs and we don't know what they mean, or we just have a general understanding, but we don't have a deep understanding of them. Then it means that our prayers for our entire life are just superficial. What are we thinking about? If you're not thinking about what you're reading, then what are you thinking about? Yeah. So we want to focus and learn and understand what these surahs mean and what they mean to us as Muslims. So that inshallah, the ultimate aim in it is so that we can have more engagement with them when we recite the Quran, and especially when we pray. But why did Allah give us small surahs in the first place? Have you ever thought about that? Why some surahs big and some surahs small? The large surahs, they contain a lot of the detail of the religion. A lot of the details. Look at Baqarah, look at Ali Imran, look at Nisa. A lot of the laws and regulations, how to live our life in this world. But if you look at the small ones, they don't contain much detail. They don't tell you how many times to pray. They don't tell you, what shares of inheritance you're supposed to get. They don't tell you what punishments to get for committing crimes. They don't tell you all these things, do they? What's halal, what's haram, who you can marry, who you can't marry. They don't tell you any of this. So what do they contain? The small surahs, if you look at them, not just from Al-Fil, but if you look at maybe the second half of Juz Amma, they're like a summary of the guidance. If you just look at these small surahs alone, you will get what is known as the usul of the deen, the basic principles of the deen. They're all contained within these small surahs. It's like out of His mercy for us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to condense the fundamentals of the religion into small, easily manageable, easily memorizable surahs for us to learn. Can you see that? Can you see the mercy from Allah that He gave us small surahs that encompass pretty much all the major aspects of the deen? Anyone can memorize them. They're easy. And if any believer memorizes these small surahs, he can't be misguided about the fundamentals about the religion, because they're all there, provided he understands what they mean, of course, which is why we're doing today's. And that way, the usul of the deen can be preserved and never lost. Never lost. Because if you don't learn Surah Al-Baqarah, but you learn Qul Huwallahu Ahad and Wal-Asr, at least the usul of the deen, I'll explain what I mean by usul in a bit, but the usul of the deen will be there for you. The fundamental principles are there. You will be a believer. And if everybody over the history of our, or the future, sorry, if everybody over the future of our life in this world was to learn these surahs, then at least the fundamental guidance will remain. Unlike previous scriptures where people forgot them. They forgot them because people didn't memorize them, or their rabbis and priests were able to change them. But not with these small surahs. Nobody can come and tell you a new version of Qul Huwallahu Ahad. They can't. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala summarized the usul of the deen, the main points of the guidance in these small surahs. The other thing about the small surahs are most of them are revealed in Mecca. Now, in the time of Mecca, put yourself in the mind of one of the believers in Mecca. The hearts are new to Islam. It's best that the messages are short, concise, and don't contain lots of details. You understand that? Think of someone who just converted to Islam. What's better for him to learn? Something like Qul Huwallahu Ahad, short, small, main details, or the ayat on divorce. Can you see the difference? And you'll find this generally, the Meccan surahs contain the usul of the deen. The Meccan surahs contain the fundamentals of the deen. And it's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is creating the new breed of the new community of believers, building them up for what's to come later on. Then the Medinan surahs are an extension of the Meccan surahs, and they include more details that they need at that time when they reach Medina. Which brings us to another interesting point. How are the surahs ordered in the Quran? How are the surahs ordered in the Quran? Anyone got any thoughts? What's the logic behind the orders in the Quran, or in the order of the surahs in the Quran? Any ideas?
Length, was it?
Length? Any other ideas? It's certainly not the themes that they cover, is it? It's certainly not the themes that they cover, because you'll find bits of Ibrahim alayhi salam in Baqarah, you'll find bits of Ibrahim alayhi salam in towards the end of the Quran. You'll find, if you were writing a book, you would probably, if I was writing a book, I'd put everything about Ibrahim alayhi salam in one chapter, everything about Nuh alayhi salam in one chapter, everything to do with marriage and divorce in one chapter, everything to do with this in one chapter. But it's certainly not like that, is it? Things are all over the place. So it's not ordered according to themes, and there's a wisdom in that as well, which maybe you can cover another time. So it's not ordered in accordance with themes or subject matter. Length, maybe? Yeah? If you look at it, longer surahs at the beginning, shorter surahs at the end. But that's not the only reason for the order. I'm taking this from Maulana Farahi, who says that's not the only reason for the order. It's one of the reasons, certainly. But you do find some smaller surahs a bit earlier than longer surahs. You do find some longer surahs later than shorter ones. Perhaps it's more accurate to say that they're in the reverse order of revelation. Perhaps. As in, most of the Meccan surahs are at the end, and most of the Medinan surahs are towards the front, with some exceptions. Because if you look at the internal structure of the Quran, you'll find that there's other patterns as well between Meccan and Medini within the Quran. But generally speaking, just like generally speaking it goes from long to short, generally speaking it also goes from Medina to Mecca. Is there a wisdom behind that? Some people have tried to come up with wisdoms behind that. One of which is that, when you're going through something, you start at one place, you get to the end, and when you want to repeat it, you tend to start with the thing that's most nearer to your mind, which is the thing at the end. So when the revelation is coming bit by bit by bit by bit. Now when it's time to put it all together, it kind of makes sense that you put it together with the things that the last bits that you got, you put those first, because those are the freshest in your memory, and you compile it backwards. That makes sense. And it's a technique used in the Quran, not just in the order of the surahs, but in other things as well. Like in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the people of the right, the people of the left, and then as-sabiqun. But then when he gets into the details, he starts with the sabiqun, and then the people of the right and the people of the left. Those of you who know Surah Al-Waqi'ah might know this. Allah taught us Ashab al-Yamin, Ashab al-Shimal, and then the sabiqun. And then in the details, he starts with the sabiqun. Because that's the freshest one in your memory. So this reverse approach is actually quite common in the Quran in different ways. One other wisdom given for the small surahs being at the end, rather than just length and the fact that they're Meccan, is that there's a sweetness about the small surahs. There's a specific sweetness about them. They're quite beautiful to read. And like a traveller coming to the end of his destination, anticipating that comfort, that home he's going to get back to, or where it's comfortable with nice food and relaxing. So that anticipation for the sweetness coming later on, or like you might anticipate dessert after a meal. So that anticipation for the sweetness to come could be one of the reasons as well why these small surahs at the back. Because most of them are very nice and they're nice on the tongue, and they're very melodious, and they're very beautiful and moving surahs, especially the last say 4 juz, very moving and emotionally moving as well, and linguistically moving as well. Right, let's look at these surahs now in more detail. Surah Al-Fil. When we get to Surah Al-Fil, first of all we need to think about what came just before Surah Al-Fil. Now if you look at the surahs from about Surah Al-Qari'ah, قارعة من قارعة وما أدراك من قارعة, to about Surah Al-Fil, there's a general theme running through them, which is one of people who love this world and money and prefer that, and children and wealth, and they prefer that over the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so Al-Qari'ah, Al-Hakum Takathur, talks about people who just collect in this dunya, all the way through till Humazah, which talks obviously clearly about the one who thinks that his wealth is going to make him live forever. So it's all about wealth, the dunya, family, and people who prefer that over Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, this Surah Al-Fil is a transition to another section. Okay? So it's a bit of that, and then also another set of themes, which take us from Surah Al-Fil to Surah Al-Masad. From Surah Al-Fil to Tabbat is a new sort of section. There's one theme running through it entirely. Before we discuss anything, can anyone guess what that theme is? Has anyone thought about what connects Fil, Quraysh, Ma'un, Kawthar, Kafirun, Nasr, and Masad, Tabbat Yadah? Anyone got any ideas? What connects all those surahs? Other than the fact that they're small.
The triumph of good over evil.
Okay, triumph of good over evil. Anything else? Sorry, why by the way?
And Fil is the destruction of the army, the evil army. أرأيت الذي يكذب بالدين. I assume that was something to do with the evil that people do with regards to their prayer and with the orphans, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to deal with them. Tabbat Yadah is Abu Lahab and how, yeah.
Okay.
Or perhaps I really would say good over evil, but the demise of people who have done bad, I guess. Or
okay.
The end also.
Somebody had a hand up at the back?
Yeah, I was going to mention there's this theme about the glad tidings.
Glad tidings. Okay.
All the scenes happen in Mecca.
All the scenes happen in Mecca. Does Ma'un happen in Mecca, in Kawthar?
I'm mainly talking about the feeling.
The feeling, correct. No, hold on to that point. Anyone else? Okay. There is a theme running through the which is to do with Mecca a bit, but we'll discover it as we go through. But before we understand that, we need to understand something which I mentioned at the beginning about Ibrahim alayhi salam. Okay? Think about Ibrahim alayhi salam. This religion is the completion of the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam, the Abrahamic faith. He's the founder of this religion. Every prophet after him was asked to follow him. Okay? Even the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam was told, ثُمَّ أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ أَنِ اتَّبِعْ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا وَمَا كَانَ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. That then we reveal to you to follow the millah, the way of Ibrahim alayhi salam, who was Hanif, and he was not of the mushrikeen. So in the Quran, we and the Prophet ﷺ were commanded to follow Ibrahim alayhi salam. Now, I talked about usul al-din. What I mean by that, before Ibrahim alayhi salam, there were prophets, obviously, and they taught the fundamental concepts of ibadah, and they taught about taqwa and piety and so forth, yeah? Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he comes, is a pivotal change point in Revelation. Because, first of all, he adds a new term, or Allah adds a new term, which is Islam, submission. And Ibrahim alayhi salam is asked to act out submission in the most extreme of ways. So extreme that no prophet after him is asked to act out submission in that way, which is to sacrifice his son. Ultimate submission, isn't it? Ibrahim alayhi salam also establishes all the major aspects of religion, the major branches of religion. Salah, charity, fasting, hajj, what we call 5 pillars, are established at the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Okay? And then every prophet after him add to that, or perhaps change some of the details, modify things, emphasize different aspects, all the way to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a culmination of that. He completes that. Okay? Our religion, Islam, is the same religion. Some of the details are different from the religion of the Jews and the Christians. Some things are explained in slightly different ways. But it's the culmination of this whole process. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this deen has been completed is the deen of Ibrahim alayhi salam. It's been completed. Now Ibrahim alayhi salam is asked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to move to this barren desert with his wife Hajar and son Ismail alayhi salam. And we all know the story about the sacrifices and so forth. Then he's asked to build the Kaaba with his son Ismail alayhi salam. And they built this house of Allah. They established the house of Allah. And everyone after that is asked, even up until us, is asked to treat this place as a place of sanctity. Everyone has a connection with the Kaaba after that. The Kaaba plays a central role in the whole millah of Ibrahim alayhi salam, the whole millah of Ibrahim alayhi salam. The Kaaba is essential because it's the thing that connects this dunya with the akhirah. It's the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the source of all blessing for the believers throughout history, from the time Ibrahim alayhi salam raised it. It's the key for all believers. And the Quraysh are going to be reminded of an incident to do with the Kaaba to remind them of their link with Ibrahim alayhi salam and the favor that they have as a result of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Now, the people of Quraysh are descendants of Ibrahim alayhi salam through his son Ismail alayhi salam. But why were they placed in Mecca? Why were they placed in Mecca? This surah, Surah Al-Fil, reminds them that the only reason that they came to this place, they didn't conquer it. They didn't come there as economic migrants seeking prosperity. They didn't move there, fleeing a disaster or looking for a safe haven. The only reason that they are there is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Ibrahim alayhi salam to build the house of Allah in that place and leave his family there. So they have no honor, they have no reason for existence almost in that place other than the fact that the Kaaba is there. Other cities are established for worldly purposes. Whatever it is, expansion of empire, as I said earlier, people, looking for business opportunities, whatever it is. But the Kaaba The Makkah was established solely to be the place of the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Ibrahim a.s. made a dua when he built the house. And he made a dua and he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for two things for his people in this place that he's leaving, his family that he's leaving there. He asked for peace and security, and that they be provided with food. Peace and security, they're in the middle of nowhere, so he asked for them to be peace and secure, and they're in a very barren desert, so he asked for food, that they be provided with food. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts this dua. Makkah had no army, they never had an army, but they were safe. No food grows in Makkah, but food is brought to Makkah by it being a hub of trade. So can you see how the dua of Ibrahim is accepted there? It doesn't grow anything, but it's never run out of food ever. And secondly, it doesn't have an army, but it's always been protected because of the dua of Ibrahim a.s. This is part of Allah's plan to this holy place. Surah Al-Fil, Allah is going to remind them that this is the favor that I have given you, O Quraysh, and this is why I've given you this favor, because of Ibrahim a.s. and the house of Allah that he's built. Now, we might know the story of the elephant, which is what the story is titled, the elephant. And just briefly to recap some of the basics of the elephant. In Yemen, there were a group of Christians who had some problems. They were oppressed by some of the rulers. And the Christian empires in East Byzantine and in Africa, Abyssinia, both conspired to go and support the Christians and basically remove the Arabs from rule and take over Yemen. So they did this by sending an army, and they sent some generals, one of them being Abraha, and another, his name I can't remember. And Abraha eventually killed the other one and took over, and he was the ruler. But he was jealous of something that the Arabs had across the peninsula, which was their religion and the Kaaba that they had. They tried to convert them to Christianity, but many of them didn't convert. And the reason they didn't convert is because they had this link with the Kaaba, and they would go to the Kaaba for pilgrimage. So he was jealous of that. So he built a church in Yemen to try and convince the people of the Arabian Peninsula to do pilgrimage to his church, thinking that if he superseded the Kaaba and replaced the Kaaba, then Christianity would flourish. So he built this big, large church in Yemen. Then, this incident mentioned by some sources, although many Muslim historians disagree on its authenticity, but it says that one of the Arabs in Yemen entered the church at night and he fouled the church, and that upset Abraha, so then he decided to launch an army to go and conquer Mecca. Perhaps this is one reason, but as I said, many Muslim historians reject this, because that's not the way of the Arabs of the time. To do something like that, in secret, to go and defile somebody's, they would have done it they would have basically gone in front of him and confronted him. Anyway, so then Abraha decides to set off to conquer Mecca, to finish his religion, so that his church could succeed. He gets from his backers in the Byzantine Empire elephants, at least 10 according to some reports, and an army of 60,000 men. This is in the year about 570 Christian era. Arabs didn't have elephants in the peninsula. This was the first time elephants were there. And they marched from Yemen to Mecca. Along the way, several Arab tribes tried to stop them, and they were easily defeated by Abraham and his army. Then Abraham and his army get to Mecca, and as the story goes, Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ, who was in charge of Quraysh at the time, realized that the people of Mecca could not defend against his army. They didn't have an army. There was maybe 10,000 Meccans at most. So he decided to send his people outside to the mountains to take refuge, and he made lots of dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the oncoming onslaught. At the same time, some people of Abraha stole some camels from Abdul Muttalib, about 100 camels, and some other things as well. So Abdul Muttalib went to see Abraha, and he came to see Abraha, and Abraha is impressed by him. He's a man of stature, grandeur. He sits him next to him, and then Abdul Muttalib says to him, "What about those camels that we taken from us? Can you please return them?" And Abraha says to him, "I was impressed by you when you came in, but now I'm disappointed in you. I'm about to launch an attack on your most holy house, and you come to worry about camels? And this is where Abdul Muttalib says the famous line that narrated in the Surah, that I am the owner of the camel, so I'm interested in dealing with the camels. As for the house, it has its own owner, its own lord who will deal with it. Then Abraha attacks Mecca, or attempts to attack Mecca, and he sets the elephant to head to Mecca, but the elephant doesn't move. Then he sets the elephant the other direction, the elephant moves. He turns it to Mecca, it doesn't move. Turns it another direction, it moves. So it wouldn't go towards Mecca. And then, while they're about to attack Mecca, the story in most sources says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent birds from outside of Mecca with rock pellets to shower upon the army of Abraham. And by a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the army is decimated. And basically, all of them, they get severe illness, and the entire army dies. In a very horrific manner. They literally, bits of them fall off, and they are reduced to nothing. That's the majority opinion on the story. Although very little of it, as with most of these stories we can't prove a lot of it. Maulana Farahi, who I mentioned earlier, has another opinion, which is that the birds didn't come to drop stones upon the elephants, but rather in the surah, when it mentions the throwing of the rocks, the Quraysh themselves are the ones who threw rocks to defend Mecca, because that's all they had. And it was a very small effort compared to what Abraha had, so they couldn't really defeat him. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a wind, like he did to the people of Lut, and like a wind that he sent on the day of Badr, with rocks in it that demolished the army of Abraha. And then the birds, they came and they feasted upon the remains of the army. And his main reason for saying this is that, apart from he quotes many Jahili poetry which doesn't give the narrative that many of the sources give. It gives a slightly different narrative. It doesn't explicitly say that birds dropped rocks on the people. And obviously those poetry would have been written at the time. Also, Abraha's army passed many villages, and the Arabs along the way fought him. They literally fought him to stop him because of the sanctity of the Haram. So then when he gets to the actual Haram, the people of Quraysh don't fight. So, it seems odd. And Allah doesn't help the people who don't help themselves. Like when he saw evil. Because they refused to fight, Allah didn't help them. So, and also Abdul Muttalib would leave Mecca to flee to the mountains instead of standing there defending Mecca. So he raised many questions against it, and quotes some pre-Islamic poetry that suggests that not necessarily, it's not very clear that the birds are the ones that fell it, but rather his opinion is that the Quraysh threw stones, and then Allah SWT sent a wind to basically demolish, with stones in it, to demolish the people. Then the birds came and ate afterwards. Well, there are two opinions. You can take whichever you wish. This is Tafseer, so there's nothing 100% authentic on it.
How does he explain Tarmeen hijab?
Yeah, Tarmeen means you through. And Alam Tara, you. So it's referring back to you. I'll explain that as a video. Alright, so let's look at the ayahs in a bit more detail. Alam Tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. Did you not see? You is not speaking to the Prophet ﷺ here. You is speaking to the people of Quraysh and every individual who knows about this story. Okay? Obviously the people at the time, they haven't seen the story, but they would have got the news about the story. This story was very common amongst the Arabs. Very common in the poetry. Everybody knew about the elephant at the time. So did you not see how your Lord dealt with the people of the elephant? Alam yaj'al kaydahum fi tadlil. Did he not make their kayd? Their kayd is a conspiracy, a plot. Did he not make their plot a failure? Tadlil, an effective failure. وَأَرْسَلَ عَلَيْهِمْ طَيْرًا أَبَابِيلَ. And he sent upon them طَيْر. طَيْر is birds. Ababil is like a flock when they come together. طَيْرًا أَبَابِيلَ, a flock of birds. Did he not send upon them a flock of birds? تَرْمِيهِمْ بِحِجَارَةٍ مِّن سِجِّيلٍ. Hijara is stone, a plural of stones. Sijil is not an Arabic word originally, it's a Persian word. It's a combination of two Persian words that became Arabicized later on. Sal, which is stone, and Gil, which is earth. So Sanjil is stones of earth, baked clay, is how many people translate it. And this kind of stone is not found in Mecca. Mecca is pure rock. So this stone has obviously come from somewhere else. If you follow the opinion of the birds and wonder what the stone. Tarmihim, again, most Mufassirin who say this refers to the birds. So Tarmihim, i.e. the birds, they threw the third person feminine, those of you know Arabic grammar. Tarmihim, the birds, they threw upon them with stones of sijil, baked clay. And Mawlana Farahi in his opinion says Tarmihim is anta, second person. You know, the same person that was spoken to in the first verse, Alam tara, have you not seen? Tarmihim, i.e. you threw, i.e. your ancestors, the people of Quraysh, you threw upon them stones of baked clay. فَجَعَلَهُمْ كَأَصْفٍ مَأْكُولٍ. Then He, Allah, made them as if they're asf. Asf is like stubble that's left on the land after the cattle have eaten, you know, that just like what's left. Ma'kul is eaten, that which is eaten. So they were left like dry stubble on the land. Because both accounts, whichever opinion you follow, both of them say that the people basically were, the bits of them literally fell off and they were left to nothing. And then the birds ate them afterwards. So it doesn't matter which way you go. The point is, there's an incident where somebody tries to attack the Kaaba and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala miraculously intervenes with His power to protect the Kaaba from an outside enemy. There's two main messages in this surah to the people of Quraysh. And one is linked to the past surahs before it, and one is linked to, remember Surah Tafseer is like a transition between two sections, right? So one is linked to the section before which talked about, see who's still awake, section of surahs before Surah Al-Fil spoke about, from Surah Al-Qari'ah all the way down.
People who value the dunya.
People who value the dunya over the akhirah. And who think that they've got might through their power, and their wealth, and their wealth will make them last forever, and so forth. So this incident reminds the people of Quraysh that Abraham and his people thought they were it. They thought they had 60,000 men and over 10 elephants. They thought their might and their power alone would achieve whatever they wanted in this dunya. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had other plans. So it basically reminds you not to be arrogant with what you're given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Quraysh were rich as well. So it's telling Quraysh, don't be proud and arrogant of your wealth, of your number, of your power, of your position. Because in an instant it could be taken away. It's a warning to them. But secondly, it's also telling them, a reminder to them of the favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them. And that favor is solely due to the fact that Ibrahim was sent there and the house of Allah was built there. That's why you are favored, O people of Quraysh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala favored you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected that house when the army tried to attack it. Do you not know the story of the field? You know the story of the field, you people of Quraysh. It's your story. You talk about it in your legends, that Allah intervened to protect that house. He didn't intervene to protect you, O people of Quraysh. Don't get arrogant. The favor of Allah is on the house. And you are the custodians of the house. So by extension, you get some favor. But the favor is on the house, and Allah intervened to protect the house. The next surah, Surah Al-Quraysh, is an extension of this. In fact, some people used to think that it was the same surah. You all know Surah Al-Quraysh, Lilat Al-Quraysh. That, what do you think the link is between Fil and Quraysh then? So Surah Al-Fil reminds them of the favor of the house of Allah being in their backyard, and how Allah protected it, and He's always protected it. And they've had so many blessings as a result of being the custodians of the Kaaba. لإلاف قريش إلافهم رحلة الشتاء والصيف فليعبدوا رب هذا البيت الذي أطعمهم من جوع وآمنهم من خوف. That because of the security for Quraysh, the security of the trips in the winter and the summer, therefore worship your Lord, worship the Lord of this house, the one who fed them from hunger, the one who gave you food, and made them secure from fear.
The dua of Ibrahim.
Yeah, a bit more. The dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam was for them to have security and food. Okay, so the surah starts, the Ilaf Quraysh. Ilaf is, has several meanings, but one of them means security. So, because of the security provided to Quraysh, the Ilaf Quraysh, Ilafihim rihlat ash-shita'i was-sayf, the security provided to them in their winter and summer journeys. What's the winter and summer journeys? Quraysh in the winter would travel. Quraysh in the winter would travel to Yemen, where it was not as cold, for trade. Excuse me. And in summer, they would travel. When it's hot, they would travel up to Syria, where it's a bit cooler for their trade trips. So they do 2 annual caravans, one to Yemen and one to Syria. Arabia is a tough place. There could be bandits on the routes. So many things could have gone wrong while they're on this trip. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made sure that Quraysh would never, ever, ever attack. Nothing ever happened to them. They're not only safe in Mecca, they're safe on their trips up and down from Syria to Yemen. They were safe. So because of the security provided to you, O Quraysh, because of the security, what kind of security? The one on your trips to Yemen and to Syria. So Allah gave them security. And He gave them food. فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّنْ خَوْفٍ. So therefore, worship the Lord of this house, the one who fed them from I gave them food so they don't have hunger, and security from fear. Others are hungry, but you were never hungry, O Quraysh. Others were attacked, but you were never attacked, O Quraysh. So because of this, what's your duty, O Quraysh? فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Your duty is to worship the Lord of this house. That's your duty. How do you repay the favor, the honor that you have for being custodians of this Kaaba? You worship the Lord of this Kaaba. So that's the link between the two surahs. Some people actually thought that this was the same surah, because they thought the fa in فَلْيَعْبُدُوا was actually linked to something in Surah Al-Fil. Abraha's army came to destroy the Kaaba. They were destroyed and eaten. Oh, you people of Mecca, you don't have the wealth or the power of Abraha, but you've never been destroyed, and you always have food to eat. Can you see the contrast between the two? Abraha had all the resources. You've got no way of getting food. You can't grow anything in your land, but Allah provides food for you via the trade routes that pass through Mecca. This is all a favor from Allah. Favors don't come without something attached to them. You've got to thank Allah. How do you thank Allah? فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Worship the Lord of this house. So Quraysh were charged with worshipping the Lord. It's a bargain. Allah has given you security and He's going to give you food, but you have to worship. Because in Islam, genealogy is not enough. Genealogy was never enough. When Ibrahim a.s. made his dua, one of his duas, when he said, "Oh, bitch," what comes before them? Continue. I'm not that big. The next bit. وإذ ابتلى إبراهيم ربه بكلمات فأتمهن وقال إني جاعلك للناس إماما. Allah says to Ibrahim, we will make you an imam of the people. قال ومن ذريتي, he said, and my descendants. What did Allah say? لا إله إلا الظالمين. My covenant does not extend to the wrongdoers. So it's not an issue of genealogy. So the people of Quraysh were honored to have this house, blessed. But Allah is telling them, you know you had a responsibility that came with that honor, which was فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. That was the deal that you had to do. فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Which other one? Okay. The next two surahs are linked to these as well. Surah Al-Ma'un. We'll just do Surah Al-Ma'un and stuff. I'll try and get it quicker. أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Have you not seen the one who denies the religion? فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُّ الْيَتِيمِ. That is the one who repulsed the orphan. وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. And does not encourage food for the poor. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. So woe be to the ones who pray, the ones who pray, who are neglectful about their prayers. الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. Who want to be seen by people, وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَعُونَ, and who refuse to supply to others even the smallest bits of neighborly needs. Ma'un is the things that a neighbor would give to another neighbor. So you know when your neighbor asks you for salt or like a cooking pot or something, that's a ma'un. So they would deny even doing this. Any guesses? This one might be a bit harder, because this is not the conventional tafsir of this, but the one we mentioned now, so it might be a bit tricky. But I want to mention it because I want to mention the importance of coherence in the Quran and why I'm interpreting it, going to follow this interpretation. Any ideas? Try and link this surah to what came before now. Try and link Ma'un to what came before. That's a bit hard.
Worship.
Okay, what worship?
If you it refers to neglecting prayers, not giving charity, stuff like that.
Okay.
And those are like acts of worship.
Okay. So what do you think extend that, you want to try to extend that to what we just mentioned, talked about. Just push it a bit more. What was the subject matter we were just talking about in those last two surahs? Who were we talking about? And what did Allah order Quraysh to do?
Who is the one that is being talked about?
Right, interesting. Now, you'll read lots of different interpretations of this surah. The one I'm going to mention now, just stick to one so it's simple. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking here that about people who don't feed the orphan, they turn away the orphan, they don't feed the poor, in fact they don't even want them to have any food, and they don't pray. Okay?
Is this a Madani surah?
No, Makkah. The way that this makes sense in terms of linking it to the surah previously is that it's talking about the Quraysh. The Quraysh are the ones. Their covenant, their deal was Allah said to them, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. How did Allah want them to worship the Lord of this house? He wanted them to pray to Him. What did they do? They put 360 idols in the Kaaba instead. So, فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. Sahun means غافلون, negligent. So woe be to the ones who are negligent about their prayers. And if they did pray, they wanted to be seen by people only, as show. That's the Quraysh. So they didn't worship Allah like He wanted them to do. What else did He want them to do with worship? What did He say in the end of Surah Quraysh? He gave them food. He gave them lots of food. So what do you do when you're given food? What's the worship that you need to do when you're given food? You share. You give it to the poor. You help the orphan. You help your neighbor. But they didn't. In fact, they were some of the meanest people. The heads of the Quraysh, if you read the biographies of the head of the Quraysh, like Abu Lahab and these people, they were absolutely mean. Absolutely mean. So the Quran says to them, you turn away the orphan. You don't encourage feeding of the poor. You don't feed them yourself anyway. But at least some people, some of them miserly, but they'll be like, we should feed the poor, we should feed the poor, we should feed the poor, and then they go home and keep their money at home, right? But they're not even that. They don't even encourage the feeding of the poor. For them, they don't even want the poor to have any food. And if you look at them, that's what they were like in Mecca, these heads of Quraysh. So Allah is saying to them, you haven't done anything that I've asked you to do. Why haven't they done it? What's the reason? What's the illah? What's the reason why people behave like this? Look at the first verse of the surah. What was it? أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ, they deny the day of judgment. Sorry, I said deen earlier, I said as religion. Actually what it means here is deen as in the day of judgment. That's why they don't do what they ought to do. They hadn't sunk into their heads. They didn't understand the legacy of Ibrahim alayhi salam. They didn't understand what it was all about, or they refused to understand what it was all about. So so basically, the three surahs will end in here inshallah. The three surahs together are, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Quraysh about the favor that they had in the house, and how amazing, how Allah always held that house and protected that house. And they were put in as custodians and guardians of that house. Then Allah moves on to say, as a result of that, you are expected to worship the Lord of that house. In exchange for the fulfillment of the dua of Ibrahim al-Islam, so that you will get security and you will get food. Then Allah moves us to the Ma'ruf, very strikingly tells them, you haven't done what I want you to do. You don't feed the poor, you don't feed the orphan, and you don't pray. And if you do pray, you pray just so people can say that, it's a total thing. In fact, you fill the Kaaba with 360 idols. And why do you do that? Because you deny the day of judgment. That's your problem. You don't know the reality of this world. You don't do enough tadabbur on where things will lead you to in the end. And on that we'll end, inshallah. And Yamna'un al-Ma'run is interesting. It says that you prevent even these smallest little things. If your neighbor was to come and knock on the door and ask you for salt, you would prevent them from getting it. You would tell them you don't have any. That's how miserly, that's how miserly you are, or leaders of Quraysh. It's a very striking, damning statement, isn't it? To end the week on. But we'll leave it there, inshallah. But that's what when they read this surah, that's what they would have realized. It's speaking to them. Now a lot of people read this surah and they interpret it into like lots of other things. People who don't have khushu' in their prayers, or people who pray their prayers late. Alladhina hum an salatihim sahun, those who neglect prayers or pray them at the end of time. People will say that alladhina hum yura'un, people who pray so that people will look at them and say they're praying, that kind of thing. All of that is okay, and probably yes, the Arabic can take it. But the theory of coherence in the Quran, trying to link and understand where the linkage as you move from surah to surah lends itself to a certain interpretation. And that's what I'm trying to get at when we do these surahs. Try and follow the link through these surahs. They're all linked in the most beautiful way. And inshallah we'll start with Surah Al-Kafir next week. And apologies to the time of it, inshallah. Any questions? If there's any questions, inshallah, we'll take them. 20 minutes will be. Like 16 minutes will officially.
You know, it's good at you said that Allah helped all of and stuff, and His life and stuff. But isn't it one of the miracles in the field that Quraysh became helpless? They gave up, they left for the mountains. And that in itself is a miracle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent to support them, to raise them, as a living miracle in front of them.
If you follow that opinion, then yes, that is the interpretation. That's how it makes sense. That they left the Kaaba literally to the hands of Allah. And this is probably why most Mufassirin follow this opinion. This is the dominant opinion. So they left the Kaaba to Allah. They did nothing, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intervened and protected His house. And that would even add more emphasis to the fact that Allah is protecting His house, and it's almost irrelevant to the story almost, aren't they? As in, if they were good or bad, it didn't really matter. The point is Allah is going to protect His house, and it's part of the miracle of the intervention in that. Question.
The last surah, Al-Ma'un, when you're talking about, the reason why I asked Madani or Makki is because of the Salah issue. I know Salah was ordained in Mecca, but after the Isra al-Mi'raj. But isn't the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about their Salah being linked about Salah, if the Quraysh was mushrikeen anyway, then the Salah was not accepted anyway, so isn't it talking about, isn't there an extension, or can you extend it to be about hypocrites or certain,
some people say that Surah Al-Ma'un is divided into two, and some of it is revealed in Makkah and some is Madani. So there's not consensus on the fact that the whole surah is even either Madani or Makki. And perhaps this is one of the reasons. Those who say that it's purely Makkan, the response to the contention would be that Salah was established by Ibrahim alayhi salam. And Salah is one of those major aspects of the religion. But what did Ibrahim alayhi salam say? إني أسلمت. Why did he say he's leaving his family there? ليقيم الصلاة. Salah. The form of the salah may have been slightly different, but the point is there was salah, and his descendants from Ismail alayhi salam onwards would have known this salah, and that would have been passed on. The fact that the people of Quraysh now aren't praying this salah is the whole point of the surah, that they've neglected this salah. Maybe Abdul Muttalib prayed that salah, but the point is that you, people of Quraysh, who this is being revealed to, you don't pray this salah. You know you don't pray this salah. So therefore you're not doing the order of Ya'muru No. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people use this to interpret those other things. But the reason why it's quite hard is that Wailul is very strong. Wail is a valley in Jahannam. It's a very harsh sort of damnation. So somebody who doesn't praise late or not on time or doesn't have khushu'. Some people say it refers to the hypocrites, then that will be okay. The hypocrites who pray just to be seen. But the believer who might have problems with the salah, it's quite strong, isn't it?
Sorry, also, just the break of that verse. I mean, فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ by itself is a verse. Yeah, in terms of it's bracketed with numbers. Yeah, so it's a verse in itself, but you can't recite it.
You're not allowed
to stop there. So, was there a reason for that, and why didn't they just make that verse longer?
Good question, and I've been thinking about it, and I didn't manage to find an answer in time. One answer I found was that it's just an emphasis thing. So Walil Musallin, and then it's like it's gravity, it hits you, and then it says Alladhina hum an salatihim sahun. So it repeats the salah again to emphasize, but it sort of like hits you quite powerfully, so that you think, oh, is that me? And then maybe then you learn the lesson of not neglecting your salah. There could be layers upon layers within it. I mean, even though I've interpreted it in one way, it doesn't mean that each verse on its own can't stand alone with its own impact. The Quran is layers upon layers. Whenever you read the Quran, there's a personal layer, which is how it hits you. So that hits me. When I hear Walil Musallin, that hits me. And then, that could be me kind of thing. But then there's also the people who's revealed to you and the context. Any other questions? Is everything clear, by the way? Was it too fast? Was it too complicated? Did you follow the themes easily? Yeah? Is there anything new? And did you feel you got anything new about the 3 surahs that you read every day? Is it sort of something to reflect on? Hold the thought, because next week, Kawthar, Kafirun, Nasr, and Masad all link with what we've been talking about this week. So I'll be repeating some of it anyway.
Tariq for the talk. This is the end of part 1. Inshallah, next week at 7:30 here will be part 2, this 4-part series. Before we wrap up, inshallah, just a few comments. Please join our Facebook event, Facebook page, and inshallah we have a YouTube channel that has been launched. It's called MAB Fridays. Inshallah, all the videos will be recorded and will be posted on that channel as well. And we'll eat first as the pieces here, and then we'll pray, inshallah. And while we're eating, inshallah, there will be collections for the pizza for everyone who wants to have it. That's it. SubhanAllah, SubhanAllah, That's it.